Everyone. Sorry, I was just waiting for some more people to join before I started talking, but I think we've got sort of a slow trickle of people joining today. So I will get cracking rather than waiting for some more people. So today we are going to be hopping over back to English Literature. So last week we did Creative Writing 101, which was the English language section. We're going to have a look at English Literature today, and we're going to have a look at unseen poetry. And we're going to be looking at the comparison question. So that's the 8th marker on AQA. It's the last question of the last English Literature exam. So we are going to be sort of continuing on with a similar vein in the sorts of things that we've been looking at. We are going to be looking at Still I Rise and Search for My Tongue, which are both about nationality, patriotism and race. So if you guys don't know me already, my name's Vicki. I did English Language and Linguistics at uni, trained and did a PGCE last year, and I've done over 400 lessons with MyTutor since September. So let's get cracking. So, hi Santati, thank you. Right. So today we're just going to be having a crack at doing the comparison. So to start off with, so both of these poems, the main theme is racism, or at least the one that they both strongly talk about. So we've talked about sort of racism quite a lot over the last few weeks. And we've looked at poems like Half Caste and Checking Out My History by John Agard. So what are the issues that we have found, or something that you've come up with on your own, or something that you might have seen on social media recently that surround racism, and how might those issues be conveyed through literature? Why do we bother to write about them, essentially? Why is that important? So there's only a few of us on today, so a lot less than usual. So I'm going to ask you guys that are here to work super hard for me today, so I'm not just talking at you. So if you guys could use the chat for me, please, I would be really grateful. What sort of things are problematic when it comes to racism? What sort of issues? There's been absolutely loads of stuff on media at the moment off the back of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement sort of being fueled again. There's absolutely loads of stuff. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about intersectionality later on. So that is sort of about not being able to compartmentalise parts of your identity. Sort of everything is sort of a melting pot, essentially. So generally, sort of the issues that we've looked at, the main writer, particularly in poetry, that we've looked at is John Agard. And in both Half Caste and Checking Out My History, John Agard generally tries to convey a sense of a lack of identity, a sense of being racially discriminated against. So Agard either moved over here in the 70s or the 80s when it was common to see no blacks, no Irish, no dogs outside letting places. So there's loads of stuff throughout Agard's work. There's sort of that lack of identity, that loss of identity, because you've moved potentially to somewhere else. And we're going to see that in the two poems we've seen today. So they're very similar to Half Caste in that sense. Checking Out My History is more about the educational system and suppressing sort of Black history, essentially. There is a really good set of documentaries that is on BBC iPlayer at the moment. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's something like Black and British, or Black British, the Untold History, the Forgotten History, something like that. It's really good. It's 4 episodes, and there's a variety of sort of different areas and sort of visiting all sorts of things and uncovering history, which we haven't recognised and which we haven't put time into remembering. So it's 4 episodes, I think. It is really worth a watch. I learnt so much from it. It was really fantastic. So absolutely loads of stuff. So why are we writing them through literature? And I suppose we could say arts generally. So arts is essentially an outlet, isn't it? To be creative, to express yourself, and one of the main things that makes up who you are as a person is your race. So being able to convey your feelings towards that, any issues that you have seen, experienced, literature or any other arts sort of subcategory is a really great way to do that, because it allows you to have that creativity and it allows you to have an audience that you might not have if you were just sort of within your own little group of people in your own little bubble. So we've looked at, I think this might be our 3rd look at unseen poetry in the comparison question. So this is the mark scheme. It's pretty straightforward. It's only an 8 marker, so we don't have to do loads and loads of work. So your 7 to 8 marks, that's your top band. It asks you to compare writers' use of language, structure and form with subject terminology used judiciously. So that means use precisely, use incredibly well, and then using that comparison to create meanings, to infer things based on those methods. So my sort of top advice to you is, it says language, structure and form. So you need 2 chunky paragraphs, maybe 3 smaller ones, to sort of be writing the right amount for this this question. So what I'd suggest you do, and what I'm going to show you in my model today, is you write 1 paragraph on language. So that could be any language devices or features that we've looked at. It could be anything to do with sort of the use of vocabulary, the vocabulary chosen, things like semantics and I can't think of the word that I want. Things like semantics and connotations. There we go. I want to say collocations and that's not quite right. So connotations, and then with structure and form, use those both together. So you could talk about the use of stanzas, the use of rhyme, anything like enjambment, asyndectic or syndectic lists, caesuras, form. You could talk about whether it is sort of in quatrains, so that's 4 lines per stanza, whether it is a ballad, whether it is a sonnet, anything along those lines. So I suggest you write 1 paragraph on language and 1 on structure and form. Most people tend to go for 2 on language, because language generally we find is easier, and structure throughout all of English is something that students find much more challenging. So when we were looking at paper 1 question 3 for the English language, that's all about structure and is one of the big questions that students really struggle with for the entirety of the syllabus. And similarly with the poetry as well, specifically when it's unseen, because you have the beauty of having a teacher explain to you what the form is in your seen poetry bundles. So with this one, you've got to sort of rely on that knowledge. So if you're not sure whether it's a ballad or whether it's a sonnet or anything like that, see if you can comment on the structure rather than the form. So those will come underneath the form category. So things like rhyming, that sort of thing, which is a little bit easier for us to visually see and get our heads around. So we have 2 poems. I'm going to read Still I Rise to you, and I'm going to play Search for My Tongue, and you will see why in a minute, because I don't think I can do it justice. So whilst we're reading them, what I would like you guys to do is think about what sort of themes are being conveyed, and then we'll have a go using a little Venn diagram. So Still I Rise then, so this is absolutely brilliant. This is on, I think this used to be on the AQA syllabus. It's on the edXL International, which I taught a while ago, but it's an absolute cracking poem. So, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like stars with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air I rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise, up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. So, this is an absolutely gorgeous poem, and there's so much that you could say about that. So, any initial thoughts, feelings, any themes that you think you've been able to pick out from what I've just read? Anything which you think, oh, that's really interesting, I wonder what that means? If you don't want me to know your names, that's fine. You can just do it anonymously. I feel like I'm going to have a really quiet day today. I'm just going to be chatting. It'd be lovely if some of you guys came up with your own ideas, put them in anonymously, or make up a name. I don't mind. Because I want it to be a little bit more exciting than me just talking at you for an hour. So, this poem, mainly in terms of themes, there's two, essentially. It's quite aggressive. Yeah, okay. So careful how you're spelling aggressive. It's double G. So it is quite aggressive. It's quite what we would call face threatening. So it's quite impolite. It's very direct. Why do you think that might be? What's the point of it? What is the big theme that is trying to be conveyed? So, I think this is a poem that is incredibly powerful, and it's the level of sort of attack, I think, is managed really, really well. So this poem is written by Maya Angelou, and she is absolutely fantastic. She is a Black woman who lives in America. Yeah, absolutely. So it is always repeating the fact, I rise, to let the reader know that nothing can break her down, back her down. Absolutely. So what this poem essentially is all about is feeling that she and people of the same race as her have been repressed, that they are not valued within society. And what she is doing with this poem is she is directly calling out the community that has repressed her. So from that we can sort of postulate that it will be white people. I've had sort of a look around at sort of different people's ideas as to who you really means. and because she is American, sort of, we're thinking more of a American white, not the entirety of the white population, obviously, but those who have allowed systematic racism to continue and hasn't been tackled, essentially. Oh, interesting. You know what? What I've tried to do is do very little research into the backgrounds and the contexts of these two people. So I wasn't swayed by knowing things contextually about them which would sway my analysis. So I've been really, really careful as to finding out information. So she lived to a really great age. So she was born in St. Louis and died in 2014. Right, so she's fantastic. So she wrote I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which I've got on my way, on the way in the post at the moment, which I'm really excited about. Constantly ordering books. So this is essentially the general consensus is that U is applying to a particular group of white Americans, essentially. Right, so let's have a look at Search for My Tongue. So vast majority of it is in English, but we've got this section here, which is in Bat's mother tongue. Hence why I'm going to play you the poem rather than try it myself and absolutely butcher that language, because I don't think I would do a good job at all. I did look up to see whether I could find a translation of it, and I can't find one, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So hopefully this will do the job.
You ask me what I mean by saying I have lost my tongue. I ask you, what would you do if you had two tongues in your mouth and lost the first one, the mother tongue, and couldn't really know the other, the foreign tongue? You could not use them both together, even if you thought that way. And if you lived in a place where you had to speak a foreign tongue, your mother tongue would rot and die in your mouth until you had to spit it out. I thought I spit it out, but overnight while I dream, मने हतु कि आखी जीव आखी भाषा में थुकी नाइकी छे परंतु रात्रे स्वप्नमा मारी भाषा पाછી આવે છે ફૂલની જેમ મારી ભાષા મારી જીભ મોઢામાં ખીલે છે ફૂલની જેમ મારી ભાષા મારી જીભ મોઢામાં પાકે છે. It grows back, a stump of a shoot, and then it grows longer, it grows moist, and it grows strong veins. It ties the other tongue in knots. The bud opens in my mouth. It pushes the other tongue aside. Every time I think I've forgotten, I think I've lost the mother tongue, it blossoms out of my mouth.
Right, so I think, well, I assume that is a teacher reading that, and hence why you've got that little background noise, because she's reading it in a classroom. So we've got essentially sort of three stanzas going on in this one. So what do you think is going on in this one in terms of themes? Is there anything which you think is different? Anything which you think is the same as Still I Rise? Is all of the subject content the same, essentially? What do we think? Yeah, so they're both incredibly similar, and they're both talking about identity or a lack of identity. So let's go to my little Venn diagram. So once again, don't have enough USB plugs. Right, so right, so they're both talking about a loss of identity. Search for My Tongue sort of more speaks about it in terms of language usage. And Still I Rise talks about it sort of as a culture and a lack of history, a lack of being recognised. So yeah, I think both of them talk about their language, don't they? But I think that if we look at this one, it's more talking about the identity as a whole, whether Search for My Tongue seems to be just about the identity of language and being able to speak your mother tongue. Right, what other sorts of things have we got in there? So Search for My Tongue, I think, has sort of a lot to do with memory. Both of them sort of reference Western culture. Still I Rise takes quite a feminist slant on it. So this is where I'm going to try and explain intersectionality, and I hope I do a good enough job of it. So we will come on to that in a minute. Right, what have you guys sent? Yeah, love. So there's a definite love for, I suppose we could say, love and proudness of heritage. I think Still I Rise has a lot of sort of essentially calls out society and the wrongs. Search for My Tongue, they both use direct address. Search for My Tongue also calls people out, but not as in anywhere near sort of a stronger way. I think this one is sort of much more personal and individualized, whereas Still I Rise is almost sort of like a battle and sort of trying to re-identify with particular areas of culture that belong to Angela that she's lost. What else have we got? So in Still I Rise, they've both got incredibly positive imagery as well. So in Search for My Tongue, there's the idea of this growth, the tongue, the mother tongue coming back and blooming and falling out of her mouth. Still I Rise, we have things like diamonds in between my thighs and gold mines and oil pumping. So things which are considered a very good way to make money, things that are coveted after by businessmen. So they're sort of slightly different ways, but there is sort of a lot of power in the images that they are creating. Right, okay, so our question for today is going to be, what are the similarities and differences between the ways the writers present their attitudes towards race? So what I'm initially going to do is I'm going to do explode a quotation, so one for each one. I've picked out what I think is a really strong quotation, and I'm going to have a go at sort of really pulling it apart in detail on what everything means. So I've got one for Search for My Tongue, and then I've got one for Still I Rise. Then I'm going to have a go at doing some speedy analysis. So I'm not going to talk at you, so I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes for each one, and I'm going to annotate as quickly as I can to see sort of how I actually do it, because I haven't showed you guys sort of me annotating without talking you through the reasons, so you can see sort of the process of how quickly it happens and sort of the amount of detail I actually bother to write down, because it's only sort of note making essentially. So let's have a go at Search for My Tongue then, first of all. So your mother tongue would rot and die in your mouth. So remember, the forward slash indicates that there is a line break there, so this spills over 2 lines. So we've got the repetition of rot right next to each other, and then we've got negative connotations of rot. So it sounds really, really horrible, to sort of imagine what a tongue sort of literally rotting would look like. So we could say that this is a metaphor because it's not literal, and that we've got a load of imagery going on here. And then your mother tongue, so it's trying to place the reader and bring them into understanding what this is all about. Mother tongue, so that would be our first language, and that would essentially be sort of part of our heritage and culture. And then we've got rot and die in your mouth. So again, we've got the second person possessive going on there. So we've got a repetition of that as well. There's also, the language is very sort of generally monosyllabic. So we've talked about polysyllabic before. So polysyllabic means many. So syllable, syllabic, poly, many. Mono means one. So for example, monochrome, you just have black and white. So there is just the one, essentially considered that sort of white is the colour, essentially. So it's incredibly simplistic. Now, why is it simplistic? My thought, when people write poetry that is very easy to understand, it is there because they want to make it accessible for as many people as possible. So I think that's the reason why, because it is so clear and obvious, and you could essentially go away and draw this. Yeah. Right, so still I rise. So this is the last two lines before we get the triplet at the end of I rise. So bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. So we've got a proudness of heritage. We've got first person. And then we've got I am the dream and the hope of the slave. So we've got a reference to culture. And sort of a belief that things can be changed. So I suppose an argument is that, you know, there was a huge slave trade for decades and decades, probably centuries actually. And at that point in time, and when we did have the slavery abolitionists coming through, it was incredibly controversial to suggest that slavery could be abolished. And for this country, I think it cost so much money to get rid of all of the slaves and free them. In this country, the government promised a sort of bailout, which was an absolute bailout to compensate the people who had lost their slaves, so to compensate white people. That bailout was so big that I think it was 2015 when they had finally paid back all of their money. So slavery was abolished mid-19th century, and we're talking 160 years later, somewhere like that, the government had finished paying back what they had promised to compensate. So all of the people that had lost their slaves and needed compensation had long died, and that money went to their descendants who had not lost anything. And I think David Cameron's family was one of them. There was a couple of other people that were really famous as well. I can't think of who they were off the top of my head, but well-known figures were still sort of either sort of their family was still receiving compensation for losing slaves 150 years ago, which seems unbelievable. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a timer on my phone. So let's get that cracking. Right, so I've got 3 minutes on each one, and I'm going to annotate as quickly as I can in those 3 minutes. Thinking, what can I unplug? Can't unplug anything. Right, okay. So right. Okay, so 3 minutes. I've got the timer going on my phone now. I've only got a minute left. Right, my timer's just about to go off. There we go. Right, so I've sort of read through that. I'm thinking sort of you probably can't read most of it. My hand's sort of cramped up halfway through. Right, how do you spot whether it's A, B, B? Right, I'll tell you. So there's sort of some things which I've sort of worked out as I'm going along in terms of form, which I haven't noted down because I sort of wanted to get to the end of the poem within that 3 minutes, which was a tall order. So I've highlighted, so you'll notice that I haven't written in full words a lot of the time, because it doesn't really matter as long as you know what you're talking about. You're not going to be marked on your annotations. So I've got direct address, repetition. This is negative, so minus VE. If it's positive, plus VE. Rhetorical question, repetition of slang. I sort of went off just saying sim instead of simile. And then what else have I got? Did I do anything else which is I've got sort of expense going on here, rejuvenated, evoking a change, new beginnings, change in stanza, metaphor. I think hopefully most of you guys can read that. So yeah, we will be playing Kahoot. Don't worry, there is a Kahoot at the end. Don't worry. So I've sort of done sort of my basic annotation, so there's loads for me to go off there. Now, in terms of how do you work out whether it's AAB, AAC, or whatever. So it's simpler than it looks. If you've been studying music, this might be slightly an advantage to you. If you've sort of covered forms in music like sonata form or ternary form or binary form. Oh goodness, it's been such a long time since I've done music, but we use the same structure essentially. So I've got history. Does that rhyme with anything? So we've got lies, dirt, rise. No. So that would be A. This would be B because history doesn't rhyme with lies. Dirt, does that rhyme with anything? No. So that would be C. Then we've got rise, which rhymes with lies. So they match up together essentially. And then we've got you, no. So that would be, we've used D already. So these were both, that would be E there. Actually, no, it wouldn't. It would be F. So this would be E, that would be F, and that would be E, and so on. So it's the same all the way down till we change right at the bottom. So these are what we call quatrains. So that's stanzas of four lines, and we have an A, B, C, B pattern going on. So that means the second and fourth lines rhyme in each stanza. Now, it's very controlled until we get right to the bottom in these two last stanzas. So the pattern changes, which is really interesting. So the out of the huts of history, shame, I rise, pain, that rhymes with shame. Then this is the same. Then we've got wide and tide. And then we've got A, B, C, C, and then we've got all of those, which would be D. So it's just matching up and pairing all the endings of the lines and whether they rhyme or not. It's a lot more complex than it looks. Right, okay, so someone's said something to me and I didn't catch it. Right, I will answer that question about how many people. I think there's about 10 of us today, but I will get Bola to answer that at the end of the lesson for you, because I don't know. So right, let's have a go then at our next one. So I'm going to do another 3 minutes on this one. I think this one might be slightly easier to do in 3 minutes. I think I expected too much of myself there with just 3 minutes. Right, so 3 minutes then on this one. Right, okay. Oh, goodness. Right, so there's loads and loads of stuff going on in here as well, but I find that one slightly easier because there aren't as many features to label. It's more sort of about the language analysis with this one, I feel. So again, we've got direct address going on, this sort of idea of conflict, pain and suffering, heritage, and wanting that to be dominant and sort of that being a big part of your identity. We've got some derogatory vocab here about sort of spitting it out. So usually we see spitting as a rude thing, at least in our culture. The idea of regaining identity, and this, so we've got no translation given, so that gives equal weighting to her mother tongue. And we've sort of got 3 stanzas that are sort of all very much independent from one another. The first stanza to me is very much, this is what you've done to me in your culture. This one is something that I can't remember which language it is, something which most of us can't understand, but proves a point that other languages can be beautiful because it sounds absolutely gorgeous when it's spoken. And this one is all about reclaiming identity. Right. Oh, right, I'll pop to that question at the end. I will show you the model answer first of all and explain intersectionality, and then I will answer questions and I'll set the Kahoot up and all the rest of it. So intersectionality, so this is where you have different components that make up your identity, which is really important for Still I Rise. So Still I Rise talks a lot about feminism, talks about being a woman, but also talks about being Black. Now, those two things merge together to create experiences. The idea is that we can't segment. So say, for example, me, I am white, I am a woman, and I'm disabled. Shall we go for those 3? So, but the idea is that I don't have one pot where stuff just affects me because I'm white, although I don't really have any of that because I live in a predominantly white country. So sort of being white is by no means a problem for me. But being a woman, there's some sort of, there's sort of sexism that women have to deal with, men have to deal with as well. But the idea of perhaps if you are a white woman rather than a Black woman, the sort of sexism that you might get might be different. And then you've got sort of, can I split being a woman and being disabled into 2 pots where all of my different things about my identity make up? Can I put each experience individually and sort them into each of those pots? And the answer is no, because you can't prize them apart, essentially. It is a melting pot. They all come together to make me, essentially. Right. I'll answer that one in a moment as well. So the idea is with Still I Rise is that both being a woman and being Black come together and are linked. That's my point with that one. Right. So I will show you my model. So I've chosen one on language and one on structure. So throughout the poem Still I Rise, Angelou directly addresses the reader throughout the poem. You may trod me in the very dirt. Here the you appears to reference those in Western society who have the belief that people of colour are not equal to those who are white. So I've been tentative. Here the you appears to reference, I haven't said it does reference. The symbolism created by trod me in the very dirt appears to reference the consistent, systematic disregard and lack of respect that some white people in the Western world have. A similar device is used in Search for My Tongue, where we see Bat directly addressing the reader. You ask me what I mean by saying I have lost my tongue. Interestingly, Bat only uses this device in her first stanza. This may be because she wants to focus on her and her own identity in the final stanza, whereas Angelou appears to want to hold the reader accountable for their actions throughout. The use of the noun tongue here references the ability for a person to speak different languages by speaking about the grief of living in a society where she cannot use her mother tongue. That creates a loss of identity. Structurally, so I'm starting off here saying, right, I'm going to talk about structure, and this is going to be really obvious for you. So structurally, Angelou uses a clear and controlled rhyming structure throughout. However, the change of stanza length and rhyming pattern alters in the last two stanzas, leaving behind the Nights of Terror and Fear I Rise. This change in a well-controlled and strict scheme appears to mirror the passion and outrage of not being respected within society. The use of anaphora throughout the poem I'll Rise and I Rise also demonstrates a constant battle that Angelou has within her life caused by an unaccepting society. However, Search for My Tongue has no rhyming scheme at all. I thought I spit it out, but overnight while I dream. As the premise of this poem is the loss of her mother tongue, her first language, the lack of rhyme could symbolise the lack of control over her first language, which she has little opportunity to utilise throughout her life due to living in Western society. This poem appears to be but coming to terms with a piece of her identity that she has lost, whereas Still I Rise creates an empowered attack on the lack of understanding from the Western community, which in turn tries to promote a change. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, here's what poem number 1 does, here's what poem number 2 does, which is a little bit similar, and here's the messages that they convey differently by doing it in different ways. So I'm sort of pulling it all together at the end, rather than just saying one poem does this, one poem's slightly different because it does it this way, and then not sort of summarising how those differences interact with the message of the poem. Right, I will pop the Kahoot up for you guys now. So this is, there's some true and false, and there is some sort of identify the features. So I'll pop that in the chat. Right, so questions. How can you revise all the language techniques for English? Like, is there a certain way to take notes? It depends on what works for you. But I think the best way to revise techniques is maybe make revision cards where you have to match up sort of the examples of similes to something like flashcards, like things like Quizlets. Sort of exposing yourself to poetry is a really good one because there's so many packed close together in poetry. But generally, any reading where you can identify features, there's loads of resources out there. I'll start this whilst I'm talking. So there's loads of resources out there which can help you revise stuff like that in terms of identifying them. So that's what I would do for language devices. So which poem has a fairly regular rhyming scheme? Well, that was super quick. Right, Still I Rise is quite strict in its rhyming scheme. There's a clear pattern. Both poems reference their identity by using different styles of language. This wasn't something that I really spoke about that much. Yeah, so Search for My Tongue has her mother tongue speaking at one point, and there's a little bit of slang or use of accent in Still I Rise. Search for My Tongue uses much more enjambment than Still I Rise. Didn't talk about this one too much either. Fabulous. Still I Rise mainly consists of quatrains. Fabulous, yeah, true. So quatrains is a stanza made up of 4 lines. So quatrain meaning 4. Both poems' stanza lengths are very similar. Absolutely. So there's a very big difference between them. The use of anaphora "you may" belongs to which poem? I think that's a quite cruel one there. Been mean. Yeah, so it's in Still a Rise. So you may think that, whatever. Good. Search for My Tongue uses a series of rhetorical questions, true or false? Oh, yes, no, right. It is Still I Rise. Still I Rise uses a load of rhetorical questions. So does my sassiness offend you or something like that? It blossoms out of my mouth, that should say, is an example of what? Yeah, it's a metaphor. Well done. The semantic field of violence is present in which poem? Fab. Yeah, absolutely. And the last one, the semantic field of death and decay belongs to which poem? Oh, yeah, Search for My Tongue. So it's the idea that the tongue is rotting. Okay, Anne's in third. Paula in two. Square root minus 1 equals 5. Well done, guys. Super impressed. Right, so I've had questions that I said I will answer at the end. I haven't got another one to do you off the top of my head, I'm afraid. Right, so I think they were in the Q&A. So if you've got any questions, throw them towards me now. I don't teach music. I did music A level and left it there. That was my original career path, but no, I decided English was better. So we've got that one about, are there going to be lessons over the summer term? Bola, can you answer the question? So would there be lessons in the summer term? And if so, would there be more lessons a day?
Hey Vicki, that's something we're currently looking at. So we're very much in early discussions about the possibility of that happening. But we will keep everyone updated as to the outcome of those discussions. Thanks.
Fab, thank you. Right, so do I offer free one-to-one tutoring? I don't. So this is my job. This is what I do, hence why I don't offer it free. So I charge £30 to £32 an hour. That's my bracket. Right, okay. Couple of sort of little things then. So if you guys want to answer these questions, because we've got a few minutes left. So which poem do you think is more powerful and why? And do the themes of these poems link with other poetry that we have considered so far together? And whilst you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to signpost you to these two wonderful books. So a few of you might remember that I showed you sort of a book order that I was having arrived. I wanted to make my bookshelf more diverse, and I ordered Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and I expected it to be a really challenging read and very academic and require a lot of thought to understand the language being used, and it was so accessible. It was such an easy read, such a fascinating read, and I think would be, you know, absolutely the right level for you guys. So absolutely recommend that book. Also, We Should All Be Feminists. So this initially started out as a TED Talk. So you can go and watch this on YouTube. It's about 30 minutes long. It's quite a long speech called We Should All Be Feminists. And it's sort of been made into like a mini book. It's almost like a transcript, essentially, of what Adichie said. And it's quite a small book. It's about that big. It's about an A6 one. It's a really cute book. So those two are really good to go and look for if you want to sort of think a little bit more on the things that we've been talking about today. Right, so I think that's pretty much it. If you guys don't want to answer plenary questions, Bola, we've had a ask again for changing the lesson times.
Yes, so again, this has come up quite a lot this week. So we're reviewing this. I'm hoping to be able to call to see whether we can find another time that's suitable for everyone. But this is one of the, I guess, pieces that's under review and discussion currently. But I should be able to provide an update hopefully by tomorrow, if not Friday at the very latest. Thank you all for your patience.
Fab. Right. Brilliant. So I think we will end it there, guys, because I think I've answered everything. Okay, so thank you guys very much for coming. Next week, I think we're doing English language, but I can't quite remember what in English language. But it will be up on the site for you to see what we're doing next week anyway. The schedule will be up. Right, so I will see you guys next week. Thank you very much for coming and listening to me go on for such a long period of time. Thank you for taking part in Kahoots and stuff like that. If you guys are interested in one-to-one tutoring, go over to our sort of main website and check out the tutor directory. There's absolutely loads of us to choose from. Thank you very much, guys. Have a fantastic week, and I will see you guys next week.